The outlaws had marched their captives through a tangled nest of dark forest. They had emerged at a clearing overlooking a deep ravine. A small stream cut the ground in two and spilled down into misty depths. Around the edge of the clearing, in the shape of a crescent moon, stood a perimeter of stones and stumps. The moon was bright and high, but even with the yellow glow, the outlaws stabbed long torches into the ground. The flames danced on the wind, their shadows twirling like they were locked in some eternal midnight ball. Sir Hyle Hunt knelt on tired legs by the cold creek. Two men in dirty, tattered surcoats loomed over him, watching his every move. He plunged trembling hands into the steady water and gulped. His throat was dry. He cupped his hands and dipped them again. This time he splashed his face, washing sweat from his brow and cheeks and hair. The dripping water ran down along his throat and neck, running over where the rope had left a burning, itching red mark that still felt raw. The band of brothers parted, and the thing that had been Lady Catelyn Stark, now called Lady Stoneheart, stepped forward and extended her pale right hand. Two men helped her rise onto the tallest stump. She threw back her gray hood and pointed to the ground. "Here," the gaunt one dressed in dark red ragged robes said. "This is where the gods shall judge kingslayers and—" he paused, "and oath-breakers." Sir Jaime Lannister stood with his head down, surrounded by a gang of men. The Kingslayer's shoulders were held in place by two separate hands. Beside him stood Brienne of Tarth like a silent sentinel. Her hands were bound. Only the tall trees dwarfed her height. Beside her stood Pod the Squire, looking nervously about. A cold wind cut through Hyle Hunt. He stood up. The world had grown quiet. Only the sound of trickling water and the beasts and bugs of the forest filled his ears. "Sir Jaime Lannister," Thoros of Myr sighed, "for the murder of Aerys II Targaryen and Robb Stark, king in the north, you stand accused of kingslaying." "He didn't murder King Robb, my lady," Brienne pleaded. "Please!" "I had no hand," Jaime Lannister said before a fat fist struck his jaw. The Kingslayer spit blood onto the grassy battleground and lowered his head. "For the failure to free Sansa Stark and find Arya Stark, and for taking up arms again against houses Tully and Stark, you stand accused of oath-breaking." "I ended the war. I brought peace to the river," Jaime explained. Another fist struck him. Hyle watched the Kingslayer closely. Jaime lowered his head farther than before. "And for the crippling of Bran Stark, you stand accused of breaking Guestright and breaking King Robert's peace." Jaime closed his eyes. "You have chosen trial by combat," Thoros motioned for Jaime to be pushed forward. "Give the bastard his sword." Hyle watched as Jaime Lannister was thrust forward, tripping over small stones. The Kingslayer used the blade to regain his balance. The crowd mumbled and laughed. Stoneheart's greedy eyes never blinked. They never looked away from the man she seemed to hate. "My lady?" Thoros turned to Stoneheart. "Brienne," she seemed to rasp. The sound was wet and wretched. "Prove your—" She coughed an awful sound. "Prove your innocence, my lady," Thoros spoke to Brienne. As her champion, the man who had been a red priest pointed to Stoneheart. "No, I will not fight him," Brienne cried out. "He is guilty of many crimes, but he has paid dearly. I know that to be true, and I will help him make things right. My lady, I beg you, please let us go." Stoneheart's terrible mouth mocked her in laughter. "I will bring your daughters back, I promise you. We will help free River Run. I will prove I keep faith with House Stark. But I need Sir Jaime to do that. Brienne begged Lady Stoneheart. She went to one knee. Brienne, Jaime said quietly, take your sword and be done with this. Hyle saw that for once in his life, it seemed, Sir Jaime Lannister looked ready to die. This was not the man he had seen years ago in tourneys and jousts. That was a true knight, Hyle remembered. No, my lord, I will not. Tears filled Brienne's big eyes. There you have it, Lady Stark. Or do you prefer I call you by this new name, Stoneheart? Jaime threw down his sword. How can we let the gods decide when men, Jaime smiled at Brienne, and women refuse to fight your war for you? Hang me if you must, but free these three. They have done nothing wrong. She'll hang you both then, the one in the yellow cloak laughed. Them two as well. He pointed at Pod and then to Hyle. Stoneheart was pulling up her hood and tightening the thick cloak about her thin body when Hyle stepped forward, looking toward the Kingslayer. I will fight for you, Lady Stoneheart. I will take the Maid of Tarth's place. Stoneheart's eyes pierced him. Hyle, no, do not do this, Brienne shouted. 4 men were holding her back. Let the gods decide. That's what the Kingslayer demanded, wasn't it? Hyle smiled. But one request. He turned to Stoneheart. You, my lady, judge me as you would Lady Brienne. If I win, she is innocent. There can be no doubt amongst you or your men. So is her squire, and so am I. We are free, and you will return our horses, armor, and swords, and you will let us depart unmolested. Promise me, or you can risk defying the gods. Jaime laughed. A murmur spread through the crowd. Stoneheart raised her hand. She looked at Thoros and nodded. Very well, Thoros tossed Hyle the sword Oathkeeper. Hyle caught it with bound hands. The Valyrian steel was light and deadly. He gripped it and turned it. It seemed to make a sound, and the song it sang was sorrowful. 2 men rushed him and cut the ropes from his wrists. They wore swords themselves and 2 long dirks. Hyle considered slashing them, grabbing the steel and tossing it to Jaime and Brienne. He wondered how fast he could move now that his hands were free. Oathkeeper would tear these men in 2, he had no doubt. They could cut their way through the line and make for the horses tied to the trunks of the trees. If they pushed the horses until dawn, it might give them enough time to outrun the outlaws and find their way back into Jaime's camp. Would there be time to save Pod, though? Hyle realized. Hyle looked to Brienne. Her hungry eyes watched the Kingslayer only. No, he told himself. There seems to be no chance for that. I have no choice. I must fight the Oathbreaker, or we all die. Will she see me as she sees him? Hyle asked himself. One day, mayhaps. What will she see in me when I strike down Sir Jaime? The man who saved her and her squire, or the man who murdered her friend? Hyle tried to push the thoughts from his mind. Gods, let her love me one day. Brienne gasped. Hyle turned toward a wailing on the wind. A flash blinded his sight as the Kingslayer's sword slashed at the distance between them. It glowed like white-hot fire against the black sky. Hyle Hunt brought Oathkeeper up and caught Jaime Lannister's blade just inches from his face. Stupid boy, the Kingslayer smirked. The woods fell silent, ringing off the old stones and white stumps. Only the clash of steel filled the night.